coming to next steps. So once an SME has is onboarded and they're working with an OEM or a large company, a lot of times SMEs find themselves squeezed. Margins, payment terms, credit periods, they find them very tight and squeezed when they're working with the large companies, and they find that their negotiation power is very low when it comes to negotiating with them, but naturally maybe in a lot of cases. So you have been again on the other side. How can an SME negotiate while they are working with these large-sized corporations where they have such a low say many times? How can they reduce their days receivables? How can they get better payment terms and credit period?
So there are two parts to your question. So one is you said on the margins, which is I'm assuming the prices you're saying, and secondly is the payment term. So these are slightly two different issues. In terms of, let me say margins and prices first. See, if you're operating in a, into inverted commas, commoditized product, where there are many people who are able to supply the same product that you are able to supply, then obviously your bargaining power is lower. Then you got to find what is the value addition, what is your USP that will make you a preferred supplier, even in that commoditized commodity for your customer. Then it could be, maybe, as I said, if the product is something that anybody can supply, more or less, then you got to look at other levers to make yourself a preferred supplier of that part. For example, if your service level is so good that even though price-wise you're not doing any better than any of your competitors, your service makes that differentiation for you to become a preferred supplier to that corporate. Let's say, for example. So from my experience, I can say that we had some suppliers who supplied us very, very standard items. We could have gone and bought it anywhere, more or less. His big USP was we had to keep no stock of it in the factory. If we ever ran out of stock of that item, all it needed was a phone call, and in 15 to 20 minutes, it was delivered in our factory. Now, that was a huge plus point for him in that category of product, because C-class, D-class item, it was not a very distinct, but still he developed that capability that my service level is so good that I will make sure your factory never stops for want of this part, because I will keep enough inventory and a phone call from you, and in 20 minutes, 15 minutes, the part is in your factory. Now that gives you an edge. So you become, okay, so then nobody is going to squeeze you even more on your cost and say that, okay, reduce even more, because now your value as a person who can make sure that my factory never stops because I'll supply you within 15 minutes. In whatever way he manages that, whether he's got a warehouse next to you or whatever way, I mean, that's his USP. So what I'm saying is you can do that. If it's a slightly more complex product in terms of manufactured to very close specifications, close tolerances, a typical engineering item, then I don't think OEMs will be unreasonable in squeezing you on margins, especially because generally if these items are made to very close tolerances to the drawings such as specifications, there is an amount of skill and there is an amount of precision involved in that product, then it is not a commodity product anymore. See, at the end of the day, the customer also wants the vendor to be in reasonable financial shape. He's not going to squeeze him out so badly that he starts running into losses or he's not making enough money to sustain his business. The customer is going to lose out at the end of the day if the vendor is also made so financially weak by the customer squeezing him unreasonably. So I think reasonable margins most customers will give the SMEs. So you got to run your operations efficiently. I mean, nobody is going to pay you for your inefficiency. If your cost has gone up and makes you uncompetitive with somebody else because of your inefficiencies, you got to set that right. So I don't agree entirely to this saying that, you know, SMEs are squeezed out of margins by the OEM. No, I think if you do your homework well, you get reasonable margins. This is this thing, especially if you're producing a part that is reasonably complex or reasonably not a completely commodity product, then I think it's okay. Then when it comes to payment terms, again, I mean, the overarching principle I still said is that the customer does not want his vendors to become so financially weak that because all that will affect the supplies that he's going to make, right? So I don't think anybody is going to be unreasonable in that. Having said that, um, you got to make sure that you invest enough money in the business to take care of both your capital expenditure and working capital requirements. You got to make sure. Many times people do not invest enough in the business to take care of working capital requirements. They invest only that much that is required to run the to say buy your land, building, machinery, etc. And then they assume that the working capital will take care of itself. That's a big problem. So you got to have enough um, you got to have enough investment in the business, either your own investment or through borrowings or through bank loans or whatever working capital limits from banks, to make sure that your working capital requirements are adequately covered in your finances in the company. So that's important. Within that, nowadays, most SMEs, government has made it mandatory that you have to be paid within 45 days. You cannot, companies cannot say, I'll pay you after 120 days. They can do that for other big corporates, but for SMEs, you have to pay them maximum 45 days. So if your product is okay and it's past quality and all that, and it's okay, you must get paid in 45 days. Within that also, now government has made platforms like TREDS, the Trade Receivable Discounting Scheme, available, where actually you can probably discount your invoices and get at a much lower rate of interest than if you borrowed even from your own bank, because TREDS is basically a platform where banks and NBFCs are actually bidding against each other to buy your debt. So if some bank is saying, okay, I'll buy it at a 9% per annum discounted rate, some other bank may come in and say, hey, I'll buy it at 8.5%. So it's actually a reverse auction. So you can actually get the best rate for each time. So TREDS is a fantastic platform where you can yourself find a discovered rate of interest that may be lower than the rate of interest that your normal working capital banker is also giving. Why? Okay, when you start to do that, you may even find corporates saying that, hey, why are you discounting it with banks? You give me a cash discount and I'll pay you early as well. Because corporates also who are, say, cash rich, rather than not having, I mean, just letting the money lie in the bank or in some liquid mutual funds or whatever it is that they do to earn some treasury income, might find it better to discount the bills themselves. So all these are also possible, but those are more, I would say, when you need money suddenly out of the, but otherwise, I think if you manage your working capital cycle in such a way and build it into your financing model or into your balance sheet in such a way that you're adequately invested money to take care of both your capex and your normal working capital cycle, I think you will manage it reasonably well. The problem happens either when you divert your working capital requirements to fund capital expenditure. This is the problem I've seen in SMEs. Or when you withdraw money out from the business and put it somewhere else, invest it somewhere else. If you really have surplus, do that, but don't do it out of your normal money. Okay, now I've generated some profits and I want to now take it out and put it in somewhere else. You can do it, provided that profits have become big enough for you that after meeting all your requirements is still excess, then you can remove it and invest it somewhere else. But sometimes people tend to do that. They actually take business money out and invest it in somewhere else, and then you land in that whole cycle of this thing. And a cardinal mistake is never borrow working capital and invest it in long-term capital expenditure. Then you get into a real trap.